The coffee cup trembled in Marcus Chen's hand as the first alarm pierced through Terminal B's morning bustle. Passengers froze mid-stride, their conversations dying into an eerie silence that made the metallic announcement echo like thunder. Code red. All personnel to stations, code red. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Around him, travelers clutched their boarding passes tighter, mothers pulled children closer, and business executives nervously checked their phones. But Marcus wasn't looking at the departure boards or scanning for his gate. His eyes were fixed on something else entirely. The woman in the navy blazer 20 feet away whose hand had just moved to her earpiece with practiced precision. She wasn't at airport security, she wasn't law enforcement, and in 30 seconds, every armed officer in Dallas-Fort Worth International would be taking orders from her. 3 hours earlier, Marcus had been just another face in the crowd, hauling his worn duffel bag through the automatic doors of DFW's main entrance. The October morning air carried the familiar scent of jet fuel and possibility that airports always held, that mixture of departure and arrival, of endings and beginnings. Gate C-47, Flight 892 to Seattle, he murmured to himself, checking his boarding pass for the third time. The paper was already creased from his nervous habit of folding and unfolding it during his Uber ride from downtown Dallas. Marcus Chen looked exactly like what he was, a 34-year-old systems analyst heading to a cybersecurity conference. His button-down shirt was wrinkled from sleeping poorly in his hotel room, his black hair needed a trim, and his thick-rimmed glasses had a small crack in the left lens that he kept meaning to fix. He blended into the crowd of business travelers so completely that he might as well have been invisible. The morning rush at DFW was in full swing. Flight announcements crackled over the intercom system in 3 languages, competing with the rolling thunder of luggage wheels on polished floors. Children's voices, mixed with the hiss of coffee machines and the constant beeping of security scanners. Marcus moved through it all like a ghost, neither hurrying nor dawdling, just another passenger in the great machine of modern travel. "Sir, boarding pass and ID," the TSA agent requested with practiced efficiency. Agent Patricia Williams had been working the morning shift for 6 years, and she could spot troublemakers, nervous flyers, and business regulars with equal ease. Marcus fell squarely into the last category: polite, prepared, and utterly unremarkable. "Conference in Seattle," Marcus offered unprompted, the way anxious travelers sometimes do. "Cybersecurity Symposium." Patricia barely glanced up as she handed back his documents. "Have a good flight." Through security, Marcus found himself with 2 hours to kill before boarding. He'd arrived early out of habit. A remnant from another life when being late could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. These days, the biggest consequence of missing a flight was a rescheduling fee and some angry emails from his supervisor at Data Secure Solutions. The Starbucks line moved with typical airport sluggishness. Marcus stood behind a woman juggling 3 phones and ahead of a college student who looked like he hadn't slept in days. The normalcy of it all was oddly comforting. This was his world now. Conference presentations, hotel rooms, and overpriced airport coffee. It was predictable, safe, and completely ordinary. "Grundy Pike Place Black," he ordered, same as always. The barista, a young man named Tyler, whose name tag was decorated with small airplane stickers, handed over the cup with a practiced smile. "Flying somewhere fun?" "Seattle. Work conference." Marcus found a table near the massive windows overlooking the tarmac, where planes lined up like patient giants waiting their turn. He pulled out his laptop and opened the presentation he'd been tweaking for weeks. Network vulnerabilities in modern transportation systems wasn't exactly thrilling material, but it paid the bills. As he typed, Marcus couldn't help but notice the subtle security measures most passengers overlooked. The cameras positioned at precise angles, the plainclothes officers whose earpieces weren't quite as hidden as they thought, the way certain areas had overlapping sightlines that eliminated blind spots. Old habits, he told himself. You're not in that world anymore. Across the terminal, Dr. Elena Rodriguez was having a very different kind of morning. She stood near gate B12, her navy blazer immaculate despite having been awake for 19 hours straight. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another government contractor, maybe Treasury, maybe Commerce Department, waiting for a connecting flight. Her credentials identified her as working for the Department of Homeland Security's Research Division, which was technically true, but told only a fraction of the story. Elena's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Package confirmed. Handler in position. Proceed with Scenario Beta 7. She deleted the message and glanced around the terminal with eyes that missed nothing. 43 potential exit points. 16 choke points where crowds could bottleneck dangerously. Security response time from alert to lockdown, approximately 90 seconds. All according to the intelligence she'd been studying for months. What Elena didn't know was that Marcus Chen was watching her from across the terminal, not out of suspicion, but simple, people-watching boredom. Something about her posture struck him as familiar. The way she held herself ready, alert without appearing tense. It reminded him of someone he used to know. Someone he used to be. Marcus took another sip of his coffee and forced himself to look back at his laptop screen. He'd been Marcus Chen, cybersecurity analyst, for 3 years now. Before that, there had been different names, different faces, different lives. But those days were over. The therapist at the VA had been clear about that. Dwelling on the past wouldn't help him adjust to civilian life. The announcement for pre-boarding his Seattle flight wouldn't come for another hour and a half. Marcus saved his presentation and decided to walk around the terminal, stretch his legs, before being cramped in a coach for 3 hours. He grabbed his coffee and laptop bag, leaving the duffel at the table, another old habit he'd learned to suppress. In his previous life, never leave gear unattended had been drilled into him until it was instinct. Now he was just another trusting civilian in an airport full of trusting civilians. As he wandered past the shops and restaurants, Marcus found himself unconsciously mapping the layout. The food court creates a natural gathering point, potential for crowd control issues. Emergency exits here and here, but most passengers wouldn't know about them. Gift shop windows would provide decent cover but poor sightlines. He stopped abruptly, recognizing what he was doing. This was exactly the kind of thinking that had made readjusting to civilian life so difficult. Dr. Sarah Hendricks at the VA had spent months helping him learn to turn off that part of his brain, to see airports as places where people traveled rather than potential operational theaters. "You're not responsible for everyone's safety anymore," she'd reminded him during their last session. "Your job now is to catch flights and give presentations about computer security. That's it." Quote, Marcus bought a newspaper he didn't really want and found a different seat, this one facing away from the woman in the navy blazer. Whatever government department she worked for, whatever she was doing here, it wasn't his concern. He had a presentation to rehearse and a flight to catch. But old instincts die hard, and when Elena Rodriguez touched her earpiece with the subtle motion that preceded operational communications, Marcus noticed. When she shifted her position to get a better view of the main corridor, he saw that too. And when she checked her watch against the terminal clocks with the precision of someone operating on a specific timeline, Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that meant trouble was coming. He tried to focus on his newspaper, reading the same paragraph about municipal budget allocations 3 times without absorbing a word. Around him, DFW Terminal B hummed with its usual energy, announcements, conversations, the endless background noise of modern travel. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. Marcus Chen, cybersecurity analyst, had a flight to catch and a conference to attend. Whatever Elena Rodriguez was preparing for, whatever scenario she was about to execute, it had nothing to do with him. The coffee cup was still warm in his hands when the first alarm began to sound. The second alarm joined the first in a discordant symphony that sent ice through Marcus's veins. Code red at DFW meant one thing: active security threat. Around him, the casual atmosphere of morning travel evaporated like steam. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and follow the instructions of security personnel," came the measured voice over the intercom, but Marcus could hear the tension underneath the practiced professionalism. This wasn't a drill. Elena Rodriguez moved with surgical precision toward the security checkpoint, her hand pressed against her earpiece. Marcus watched her navigate through the growing crowd of confused passengers, her navy blazer cutting through the sea of travelers like a ship through choppy water. She wasn't heading for an exit. She was heading deeper into the secure area of the terminal. "What's happening?" asked a woman clutching a baby carrier, her voice pitched high with growing panic. "Are they terrorists?" The question hung in the air like smoke, spreading fear faster than any official announcement could contain it. Marcus saw the telltale signs of crowd psychology taking hold. people gravitating toward each other for comfort, voices rising in pitch, the subtle but unmistakable shift from individual travelers to a collective organism driven by emotion rather than reason. TSA agent Patricia Williams was having the worst morning of her 6-year career. The alert had come through her radio at 9:47 a.m. Possible IED detected, Terminal B, Concourse C. All stations implement a lockdown protocol. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She'd been through countless drills, but this was different. The bomb detection equipment at Gate C-47 had registered positive for explosive residue on a piece of luggage that had already passed through initial screening. Worse, the passenger who'd checked the bag was nowhere to be found. "Central, this is Williams at Checkpoint Bravo," she spoke into her radio while simultaneously directing passengers away from the affected area. "I need confirmation on the evacuation perimeter. Are we clearing just Concourse C or the entire terminal?" "Stand by, Williams. We have a federal taking point on this one." Federal? That meant FBI, maybe ATF, possibly Homeland Security. Patricia had worked with federal agencies before, during training exercises, and they always brought their own procedures, their own chain of command, and their own way of doing things that didn't always mesh with airport security protocols. Meanwhile, Marcus had positioned himself near a support pillar that provided good sight lines while keeping him out of the main flow of foot traffic. The newspaper lay forgotten in his lap as he observed the unfolding situation with eyes that had been trained to see patterns, gaps, and potential problems. The TSA was implementing a partial lockdown, but their response was textbook, by which Marcus meant predictable, systematic, and potentially inadequate if this was anything more than a standard bomb threat. They were herding passengers away from Concourse C, but the bottleneck they were creating near the food court could become a secondary problem if panic set in. More concerning was the woman in the navy blazer. Elena Rodriguez had reached the security checkpoint and was now in animated conversation with what appeared to be the shift supervisor. Even from a distance, Marcus could see her displaying credentials that made the supervisor's posture change from defensive to deferential. Whatever agency she represented, it carried enough weight to take operational control from airport security. "Excuse me, sir, you need to move toward the exit," said a young security guard, his voice cracking slightly with nervousness. Marcus looked up to see Officer James Morrison, fresh out of training academy, trying to clear the seating area. "Of course," Marcus replied, standing slowly. "What's the situation? Should I be worried about my flight?" Morrison glanced around, then leaned closer. "Between you and me, they found something suspicious on a bag scan. Could be nothing. Could be..." He shrugged, not wanting to say the word bomb out loud. "I understand. Thanks for keeping us safe." Marcus gathered his belongings, but instead of heading toward the exit, he moved laterally toward a different seating area that would give him a better view of the developing situation. Elena was no longer at the checkpoint. She'd disappeared deeper into the terminal, which meant she either had security clearance that superseded airport protocols, or she was part of whatever was happening. Marcus's instincts, dormant for 3 years but never truly dead, were now fully awake and screaming that something was very wrong with this picture. At the Transportation Security Operations Center, buried deep within DFW's administrative complex, Deputy Director Robert Hayes was coordinating what was rapidly becoming the most complex security event of his career. The suspicious luggage had tested positive for PETN, a military-grade explosive, but initial X-ray analysis showed components that didn't match any known terrorist device profiles. "Sir, we have conflicting intel," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim from the Dallas Police Department's Special Operations Division. "FBI says this matches the signature of a sleeper cell they've been tracking, but ATF is saying the device configuration suggests a false flag operation." Hayes rubbed his temples. False flags meant someone was trying to make it look like terrorism when it was really something else. Corporate espionage, government testing, or worse, an actual government operation that the left hand didn't know about while the right hand was doing. "What about the passenger who checked the bag?" Hayes asked. "Still missing. Security footage shows him leaving the bag at check-in, then walking toward the exit instead of to his gate. No facial recognition match in our databases, but his ID checked out at the time." "Checked out how?" "Valid passport, clean background check, ticket purchased with a legitimate credit card. Kim paused. "But sir, something's bothering me about the timing." The bag was flagged exactly 43 minutes after initial screening, which is unusual. Most explosive detection happens within 15 minutes of the scan. Hayes felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. 43 minutes was enough time for someone to position themselves strategically, for backup teams to arrive, for the media to be notified. It was enough time to orchestrate rather than simply react. "Lieutenant, I want you to pull all the security footage from the last 2 hours. Not just the passenger areas. I want to see every person who entered this terminal with any kind of credentials or clearance." Back in the terminal, Marcus had found a position near the gift shop that allowed him to observe both the security response and the passenger behavior. What he saw made his blood run cold. The evacuation wasn't random. Passengers were being directed toward specific exits, creating predictable movement patterns. The TSA agents were following protocol, but someone had designed that protocol to funnel people exactly where they wanted them to go. More troubling, Marcus counted at least 6 individuals who weren't responding to the evacuation orders the way civilians should. They moved with purpose rather than panic, positioned themselves at key observation points, and most tellingly, they all seemed to be waiting for something. Elena Rodriguez reappeared near Gate B-15 no longer alone. She was accompanied by a man in a dark suit who carried himself with a particular brand of alertness that screamed federal agents. They were setting up some kind of command post, using tablets and secure communication devices that looked far more sophisticated than standard airport security equipment. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his airline. "Flight 892 to Seattle delayed indefinitely due to security situation. Please monitor departure boards for updates." He almost laughed at the irony. 3 years of working to become a normal civilian, and here he was in the middle of exactly the kind of situation he'd trained his entire adult life to handle. The universe apparently had a sense of humor. A commotion near the main security checkpoint caught his attention. 2 more federal agents, at least Marcus assumed they were federal, were having a heated discussion with the TSA supervisor. Their body language suggested disagreement about protocols, jurisdiction, or tactics. One of them kept gesturing toward the terminal exits, while the other pointed toward Concourse C, where the suspicious device had been found. That's when Marcus saw it, the subtle hand signal Elena Rodriguez made to someone across the terminal. It was quick, barely noticeable, but Marcus had used similar signals in Kandahar, in Baghdad, in a dozen other places where silent communication meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. This wasn't a response to a terrorist threat. This was an operation in progress, and every passenger in Terminal B was now an unwitting participant in whatever Elena Rodriguez and her team had planned. The silence that followed the final all-clear announcement felt almost sacred. Marcus stood in the center of what had once been chaos, watching as the last of the simulation equipment was carefully packed away by technicians who moved with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Elena Rodriguez approached him slowly, her navy blazer torn at the shoulder from their earlier confrontation, her usually perfect composure replaced by something Marcus had rarely seen in career intelligence officers: genuine humility. "Agent Chen," she said formally, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, Marcus, I owe you an explanation." Around them, the terminal was slowly returning to life. Passengers who had been evacuated were being allowed back in small groups, their faces showing the particular mixture of relief and confusion that followed any major security event. The coffee shops were reopening, the departure boards were updating with new flight times, and the familiar rhythm of airport life was beginning to reassert itself. "The explanation can wait," Marcus replied, watching as paramedics finished checking on the passengers who had been affected by the smoke grenades. "Are they going to be okay?" "Minor respiratory irritation at most. The compounds we used are designed to simulate real chemical agents without causing lasting harm." Elena followed his gaze. "But that's not really what you're asking, is it?" She was right. Marcus was asking about the deeper implications, about what it meant that a federal training exercise had gone so badly wrong that civilians had nearly been seriously injured, about what it said about the current state of homeland security preparedness, about whether the very agencies designed to protect people were themselves becoming threats to public safety. Deputy Director Hayes appeared at Elena's shoulder, his face grim but his eyes showing a respect that hadn't been there during their earlier confrontations. Mr. Chen, I've just finished briefing the Secretary of Homeland Security. She wants to meet with you personally. I'm not interested in meetings with cabinet officials, Marcus said quietly. I'm interested in making sure this never happens again. That's exactly why she wants to meet with you. Hayes handed him a business card that felt heavier than it should have. What happened here today? It exposed flaws in our system that we didn't even know existed. We need people who can see those gaps. Marcus looked at the card without reading it. 3 years ago, he would have jumped at the chance to work at the highest levels of national security again. But 3 years ago, he'd also believed that the system was fundamentally sound, that the people in charge knew what they were doing, that accidents like today's were impossible. The exercise was designed to test airport security response to a coordinated terrorist attack, Elena said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent months planning something that had gone spectacularly wrong. Multiple entry points, insider threats, chemical weapons, communications jamming, everything we thought might happen in a worst-case scenario. Everything except an off-duty intelligence operative who could disrupt your carefully planned chaos, Marcus observed. We had contingencies for armed passengers, for law enforcement personnel, even for other federal agents being present, but someone with your background and your... She paused, searching for the right word. Your particular skill set operating as a civilian? That wasn't in any of our models. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. He'd spent 3 years trying to become invisible, to blend into the civilian world so completely that no one would ever guess at his past. His success at becoming ordinary had made him extraordinary when circumstances demanded it. The exercise parameters included real explosive residue to make the threat appear genuine to airport security, Hayes continued. Real federal credentials, real interagency confusion, real communication breakdowns. We wanted to test how the system would respond under actual stress. And instead you created actual stress, Marcus said. Those people weren't acting panicked. They were panicked. Real fear, real terror, real potential for trampling injuries when your smoke grenades went off in an enclosed space. Elena nodded, her professional mask finally slipping completely. I've run simulation exercises on 4 continents over the past decade. I thought I understood the difference between controlled and uncontrolled variables. I was wrong. Lieutenant Sarah Kim joined their growing circle, her uniform still dusty from crawling through ventilation shafts during the final phase of the crisis. The passenger who reported the suspicious device, Mrs. Jennifer Walsh from Ohio, she's asking for you specifically, says she wants to thank the man who kept everyone calm. Marcus felt a familiar weight settling on his shoulders. During the height of the crisis, when panic had threatened to turn evacuation into stampede, he'd found himself talking to frightened passengers, guiding them toward exits, using techniques he'd learned for managing civilian populations in combat zones. He'd done it instinctively, without thinking about the implications. She's not the only one, Kim continued. I've got 14 passenger statements mentioning you by name. They all say the same thing, that you seemed to know what was happening before anyone else did, that you helped them stay calm when they thought they were going to die. The truth was, Marcus had known something was wrong long before the first alarm sounded. His instincts, sharpened by years of operating in hostile environments, had picked up on the subtle signs that Elena's team had been unable to completely conceal. The synchronized movements, the staged positioning, the too-perfect timing of events, all of it had screamed exercise to someone trained to recognize deception. But the passengers hadn't known it was an exercise. To them, the threat had been real, the danger immediate, and the chaos genuine. And in that moment, Marcus had chosen to help them rather than expose the simulation. There's something else, Hayes said, producing a tablet from his briefcase. We've been analyzing the security footage from the entire event. Your interventions, the way you managed crowd flow, identified potential bottlenecks, even predicted where our team would deploy countermeasures. It's textbook crisis management, but applied in ways our training manuals don't cover. On the tablet screen, Marcus watched himself from a dozen different camera angles, moving through the terminal like he was conducting an orchestra. He'd been so focused on managing the immediate situation that he hadn't realized how visible his actions had become. The Joint Chiefs have already requested a copy of this footage for training purposes, Elena added. What you did today, bridging the gap between federal response protocols and civilian crowd management, it's something we've been trying to solve for years. Marcus handed the tablet back without watching more. I was just trying to keep people safe. That's exactly the point, Hayes said. You weren't thinking about protocols or chain of command or agency jurisdiction. You were thinking about people. And because of that, nobody got seriously hurt today despite everything that went wrong. The weight of their words settled around Marcus like a familiar coat. For 3 years, he'd been running from the responsibility of being the person others looked to in crisis situations. He'd wanted to be ordinary, invisible, just another passenger catching flights and giving boring presentations about computer security. But ordinary people didn't notice the subtle signs of operational planning. Ordinary people didn't instinctively know how to manage crowd psychology under extreme stress. Ordinary people didn't have the training to recognize when a simulation was spinning out of control and needed someone to step in before people got hurt. Dr. Sarah Hendricks had been wrong about one thing, Marcus realized. He wasn't responsible for everyone's safety, but he was responsible for using his abilities when circumstances demanded it. The trick was learning to distinguish between paranoia and genuine need, between the ghosts of past missions and present reality. There's a position opening up, Helena said quietly, interagency liaison for domestic security training. Someone who understands both operational requirements and civilian impact. Someone who can make sure today's mistakes don't happen again. Marcus looked around the terminal one more time. Passengers were beginning to board delayed flights. Children were running around the seating areas again, and the coffee shops had lines of customers who looked more annoyed by the delay than traumatized by the experience. Normal life was reasserting itself, which meant the system had worked, not perfectly, but well enough. "I'll think about it," he said finally. But as he watched Elena Rodriguez coordinate the final cleanup with the calm professionalism of someone who had learned important lessons today, Marcus knew he'd already made his decision. Some responsibilities couldn't be abandoned, only accepted or declined, and today reminded him which choice he could live with. His phone buzzed with a new message. Flight 892 to Seattle, now boarding at Gate C-47. Thank you for your patience during today's security event. Marcus looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. He had a different kind of boarding to do now, and a different destination in mind. The cybersecurity conference would have to wait. There was more important work to be done. As the crowd began to thin, Marcus found himself approached by Jennifer Walsh, the Ohio passenger who had first spotted the suspicious device. She was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes that still held traces of the fear she'd experienced hours earlier. "Mr. Chen," she said hesitantly, "I hope you don't mind, but the police officer told me your name. I wanted to thank you personally." "There's no need." "Yes, there is." Her voice carried the firmness of someone who had made up her mind. "When that alarm started going off, when people began pushing and shoving, I thought about my grandchildren back in Columbus. I thought I might never see them again." She paused, gathering herself. "But then you were there, telling us where to go, keeping us calm. You made me believe we were going to be okay." Marcus felt the familiar discomfort that came with recognition. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Jennifer said firmly. "Most people would have been running for the exits themselves. You stayed and helped strangers. That's not something anyone would do. That's something special people do." Behind Jennifer, Marcus noticed a small group of other passengers had gathered, all watching the conversation. Among them was the college student who'd been ahead of him in the Starbucks line, the businesswoman with 3 phones, and several families with young children. They all bore the same expression, a mixture of gratitude and curiosity about the unassuming man who had somehow known exactly what to do when their world had turned upside down. "There's something else," Jennifer continued, reaching into her purse. "I run a small nonprofit back home. We work with veterans who are struggling to readjust to civilian life. I've seen what it looks like when someone is carrying more than they should have to carry alone." She handed him a card. "If you ever need someone to talk to, someone who understands that sometimes doing the right thing is the hardest thing, please call me." Marcus took the card, surprised by the unexpected connection. "How did you know?" Quote, "The way you moved. The way you seemed to see everything at once. The way you took charge without making anyone feel like they were being ordered around." Jennifer smiled sadly. "My late husband was in the military. 22 years in the Army. He had that same quality, the ability to be exactly what people needed in a crisis, even when it cost him something to do it." The weight of understanding passed between them, Marcus realized that his attempts to become invisible hadn't been as successful as he'd thought. People like Jennifer Walsh, who had loved someone with his background, could still recognize the signs of a warrior trying to live in a world that didn't always make sense to him. "Mrs. Walsh," Elena Rodriguez interjected, approaching with what appeared to be official paperwork. "I'm Agent Rodriguez, with the Department of Homeland Security. I wanted to personally apologize for what you experienced today. Our training exercise created genuine fear and distress, and that's something we take very seriously." Jennifer looked between Elena and Marcus, her expression sharpening. "Training exercise? You mean this was all fake?" "The threat was simulated, yes, but your fear was real, and the potential for harm was real. That's why Mr. Chen's actions were so crucial." Elena's professional demeanor softened slightly. "He helped prevent what could have been serious injuries during our scenario deployment." "So he wasn't part of your exercise?" Jennifer asked. "No, he was just a passenger, like you." Which makes what he did even more remarkable. Marcus watched Jennifer process this information, seeing the exact moment when her understanding shifted from gratitude to something deeper, respect for someone who had chosen to help without any obligation or training requirement to do so. "Well then," Jennifer said, turning back to Marcus, "that makes it even more important that you keep my card. Because what you did today wasn't just professional training kicking in. It was a character." As Jennifer rejoined her group and they headed toward their rescheduled flights, Marcus found himself alone again with Elena and Hayes. The terminal was nearly back to normal operations, but something fundamental had changed in the dynamic between the three of them. "She's not wrong, you know," Hayes said quietly. "I've read your service file, Marcus. Kandahar, Baghdad, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, decorated for valor under fire, exemplary record until—" He paused diplomatically. "Until I couldn't do it anymore," Marcus finished. "Until watching friends die for missions that didn't make sense became too much to carry." "Until you choose to prioritize your mental health over your career," Elena corrected. "That's not failure, Marcus. That's wisdom." The words hit harder than Marcus expected. For 3 years, he'd carried the shame of walking away from his unit, his mission, his identity, as someone others could count on in impossible situations. The VA therapists had told him that recognizing his limits was healthy, but it had never felt like wisdom. It had felt like abandoning the people who needed him most. "But today showed us something important," Hayes continued. "Taking care of yourself doesn't mean you stop being the person who can take care of others when it matters. It just means you choose when and how to do it." Marcus looked around the terminal one more time, seeing it with new eyes. Hours ago, this had been just another airport, where he was just another passenger. Now it was the place where he'd rediscovered something he thought he'd lost forever. The ability to be helpful without being consumed, to take responsibility without carrying the weight of the entire world. "The position Elena mentioned," Hayes said, "it's not about going back to the field. It's about using your experience to make the field safer for everyone, operatives and civilians alike. Teaching other agents how to see what you saw today, how to balance operational objectives with human considerations." "It would be based here in Dallas," Elena added. "Reasonable hours, real weekends off, a chance to build something positive instead of just responding to crises." Marcus thought about his apartment across town, his quiet life of conference presentations and technical manuals, his carefully constructed routine designed to keep him away from anything that reminded him of the weight of command. It had been peaceful, but Jennifer Walsh was right. It had also been incomplete. "There's one condition," Marcus said finally. "If I take this position, I want to implement a new protocol. Before any major training exercise involving civilian spaces, we run smaller-scale tests to identify potential failure points. No more learning on the job when real people could get hurt." Elena and Hayes exchanged a look that Marcus recognized as the moment when theoretical discussions became concrete plans. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need," Hayes said. "When can you start?" Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at his contact list, his supervisor at Data Secure Solutions, his conference coordinator in Seattle, his carefully planned civilian life. Then he thought about Jennifer Walsh's grandchildren in Ohio, about the college student who'd been genuinely terrified for his future, about all the unnamed passengers who had trusted him to help them find safety in chaos. "Let me make some calls," he said. "I think it's time for Marcus Chen, cybersecurity analyst, to officially retire, and for someone else to get back to work." As Elena and Hayes headed back to their command post to begin the extensive after-action reports that would reshape federal training protocols, Marcus remained in the terminal for a few more minutes. The space that had been filled with crisis and confusion now hummed with ordinary life. Conversations about missed connections, children asking for snacks, business travelers typing urgently on laptops. It was beautiful in its normalcy, and for the first time in 3 years, Marcus felt like he belonged in both worlds. The one where people lived ordinary lives, and the one where someone needed to make sure they could keep living them safely. His reflection was interrupted by the arrival of Captain David Morrison, James Morrison's father, and a veteran himself, who had driven to the airport as soon as he heard about the security incident involving his son. "Mr. Chen," the older man said, approaching with the measured gait of someone who had spent decades in uniform, "my boy James told me what you did today. How you helped keep people calm. How you seemed to know what was happening before anyone else did." Marcus shook the offered hand, feeling the familiar grip of military recognition. "Your son did good work today, stayed professional under pressure. He said you gave him advice during the crisis, told him to focus on helping people instead of following protocol when the two didn't match." Captain Morrison's eyes held a particular knowledge of someone who had made similar choices in different circumstances. "That's good advice. Hard to follow sometimes, but good." "Sometimes the rule book doesn't cover what people actually need," Marcus replied. "Exactly," the older man smiled. "James is thinking about applying for federal security training after what happened today. Says he wants to learn how to do what you did, see the bigger picture while still taking care of the details." Marcus felt a warm satisfaction at the news. James Morrison had shown good instincts during the crisis, and with proper training, he could become the kind of officer who made the system work better for everyone. "Tell him that's a good choice," Marcus said, "and tell him that someone who cares about people first and procedures second will always find a way to serve both." As Captain Morrison headed off to find his son, Marcus realized that the ripple effects of today's events would extend far beyond his own career change. Jennifer Walsh would return to Ohio with a story about strangers helping strangers. James Morrison would pursue a path that might lead him to become the kind of federal agent the system needed. Elena Rodriguez would design better training protocols that balanced operational realism with human safety. And somewhere in the complex web of Homeland Security, there would be one more person working to ensure that the systems designed to protect people never forgot that protection was supposed to be about people, not just procedures. Marcus picked up his duffel bag and headed toward the exit, but not toward his original gate. He had calls to make, plans to change, and a new mission to begin. For the first time in 3 years, he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The automatic doors slid open as he approached, and Marcus stepped out into the Texas afternoon, ready to board a different kind of flight, one that would take him not away from responsibility, but deeper into the kind of service that fed his soul instead of consuming it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.